Good morning, everyone. Divan, I see you are online. All right.
Great. Thanks, Anya. Yeah, I'm over here. Should we
Okay.
give the guys another minute or two? What's your plan?
Yes, I think let's give one more minute for anyone that still wants to join, and then I'll do introductions and hand over.
Sounds perfect. Thanks,
All
Anya.
right. Thanks. Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to another Lasha web chat. Just an introduction from my side. So we have Divan on today. Divan van der Merwe is the Managing Director of XM, a multidisciplinary team of scientists and associates in the engineering and financial sectors that is focused on the mining industry. Divan has a master's degree in environmental management from the University of the Free State and operates within the Mine Closure and Rehabilitation Division, with his focus being on land management and biodiversity. His land management consulting tasks include land use development from the operational phase to mine closure by developing the business case to yield the best reliable results that ensures the legacy of mining leaves an alternative economy behind. Divan believes you should practice what you preach, and in 2023 actively supports clients with managing over 60,000 hectares of land throughout South Africa and is involved with the planning of more than 10,000 hectares of disturbed mining land. His team includes a consulting arm as well as a technical team to implement end land uses. Thanks, then I'll hand over to you, Divan.
Great. Thanks very much, Anya. Can everybody see the presentation I'm sharing?
Yes, we can see.
Oh, good. Perfect. Yes, and Anya, with that big introduction, I'll have to start off with a disclaimer, I guess, just to make everybody more comfortable. First disclaimer, I already sat in a meeting at 8 this morning and people thought I'm wearing a New Zealand rugby jersey. So please don't even ask that question. It's just on the day, didn't work out for me. Guys, thanks for joining. Let's jump into this straight away in land use planning. And Anya, you actually started that discussion a couple of months ago on some of the first web chats. And we found a lot of interest about what is in land use planning and really how we can make it better and get it up to spec, which us as scientists believe and want to do in the end of the day. Now, today, we probably sort of consultants and we have the industry there as well. We might have people from the regulator, government, be it as it may. You guys will all find a touch point in this presentation. And once I'm done with this, we'll open up for discussion. So hopefully I'll do about 30 to 40 minutes and then we'll have a nice chat around in land use planning. Today, my topic is really around the complexity behind it. In land use planning, sometimes we see as something that we have to do it after rehabilitation. Let's quickly pull up a map and put a couple of blocks in and say, yeah, we graze there, we do that, etc. But I want to show you today there's a lot more thinking behind it, and except for just the way I believe or I think about it and how I approach in land use planning, is also to instill in you the thought about what responsibility you as a consultant or an operation and management or a government entity actually has in making decisions on in land use planning. So today, I'm not going to educate you about anything. I'm going to bombard you with my opinion. I like talking a lot for those of you guys who know me. And I might be wrong, offensive, or impractical, but that engages people. And that's what scientists are. We challenge each other daily. So I'll take you through basic things like a dream or a vision or philosophy, and we're going to go to the opposite spectrum where I can actually show you how we should drive action and get on the ground rather than just talking, same as Anya said on my introduction. If I don't do these things like being practical or offensive or wrong or dreaming or saying let's do things right now, we are really not doing what we should and like I said, let's start the philosophy side. What I believe me as a person want to contribute by using in land use planning as a profession, and what's the process, and some examples I'll explain at the end of this. Okay. So just on in land use planning, I'm assuming a lot of people know what in land use planning is, but I'll touch on that a little bit more about where does it really fit into mining. It doesn't have a one specific start and an end or a point where it sits in mining. In land use planning and mining does not link into each other. Mining is a land use. Alternative land use planning is in land use planning. Where we put it in this mining land use or moving to a different one is really where it should be thought of. So let's just consider mining where I operate in. In land use planning is something that I do before we even do rehabilitation planning or when we do our EIAs. If we decide to change a land use, and let's say in South Africa, we usually change agricultural land use, what can we bring it back to in the end? Because mining is not finite, it ends at a point, and we need to bring it back to something that's productive. That's the basic principle behind it. So really in land use planning starts in the beginning. Same as we said many years ago, as consultants, we would say rehabilitation starts the day we break ground as well. And the same with in land use planning. And rehabilitation is actually just a tool we use to get your in land use. So it doesn't help we do all this rehabilitation planning without knowing what are we rehabilitating it towards. And of course, there's opportunities and constraints linked to all of those. But I also want you, if there's any consultants that does EIAs, to also think a little bit more about in land use planning. You guys always use this impact hierarchy, saying first try and avoid sensitive environmental areas, mitigate, rehabilitate. But really, also once you do EIA processes, also try and avoid something like high quality land that's available, high quality grazing, high quality crop production land or soils or water resources. We shouldn't just limit ourselves on environmental avoidance, but the more we avoid something that can be a supporting structure or aspect to our land use or our economy afterwards, we should try and avoid that as well. So in the planning phase, already I've touched on a couple of points where in land use planning is already forming part of it. We say in land use planning, but we should talk about land use planning actually. So during the operations and concurrent rehabilitation, we should implement our land uses. If we have peripheral land that is not being mined on, and we see that a lot in South Africa, you buy a farm, you mine 300 hectares and 1,000 hectares lies dormant. That's already part of your land use planning. It shouldn't just be dormant until we decide to close it. Now we want to utilize that. So in land use planning or land use planning has a role in operations as well. Also concurrent rehabilitation, you can start bringing in your inland uses. Start testing your inland uses in operations. It just gives you less risk and better chance of success the day we pack up and we leave and give this over to whoever it might be. Then at final closure, and I think that's where a lot of us think about inland use planning. Oh no, we're closing in 5 years' time. We need to know now what we're going to do. We're all leaving. We're leaving something to who and what are we leaving for them? And then we also have the regulatory side behind us that we need to tick that box on. So at the point at final closure, we should already actually know what we are doing, what are we rehabilitating towards, what's our opportunities. At that point, we should really just rather think about the entity structures, the organizational structure, who's going to take us over, how are they going to get money. And by the time we leave, we shouldn't think about the land use. We should think about how do we make sure that this in land use, which at that point in time actually becomes an alternative economy, is cash flow positive and sustainable. Because if it's not cash flow positive or there's no capital to support it, it's just going to fail and fall back to rehabilitated land and not be an inland use. So why do I believe in land use planning is complex? And this is some of the philosophy side, and I'm going to start off with it before I go into the more practical examples. Is that in land use is really a discussion of economics and policies that's driven by scientists at the moment. I would like to really know how many developmental economists we have on this call. I'm guessing 1 or 2, maybe if we're lucky. But there is clear differentiation between rehabilitation planning and land use planning. Rehabilitation, purely science, engineering, legal job, that is true. But land use planning isn't really a rehabilitation expert's position because of the economic side, the policy side, and of course that links all to our people side as well. So it's really highly encompasses various professions to really see what we're trying to do in land use. And when we talk in land use in our industry, the conversations at the moment is really blue sky thinking, and I like it. We say, oh, but we've got a pit, let's build a hotel in it and do bungee jumping in it. But the next guy that does it next year says, no, let's just close and make it safe and let's grade. So really two different broads and spectrums that we operate in. Once again, emphasizes the complexity of and the spectrum that we think about in land use planning. But if we differ so much, is it bad? Not at all. In land use planning is really highly specific to a country, to a specific economy, to its policies, to its climate, to its region. So we will have it different because in the end, in land use for me should be whatever is the need that we need for that area or for that country. Now, Rihanna, I think, did a MSc in 2018, and I actually liked this part in her dissertation, is that she quoted Barkermeyer saying that a wicked problem is a situation that's highly challenging, contradictory in nature and dynamic. And everybody who's worked in land use planning, even rehabilitation, knows that those two things, challenge, contradictory in nature and dynamic, is really the essence of any discussion in a boardroom. But what's for me important is that I think then says that in land use planning is a wicked problem per definition, because it requires this integration of ecological, social, political, cultural, economic drivers. And also important, it operates over varying temporal and spatial scales. This what we decide today might be a good inland use, might not be one in 30 years' time. We might be in a whole different position as a country or globally. And a lot of our mining operations, if we start planning it now, only ends in 30 years' time. So really, the wicked problem is sort of in land use planning, and this definition shows you some of the philosophy and thinking about the complexity of in land use planning. But let's make it less complex for ourselves, because like Anya said, I like to get onto the ground and get my feet dirty as well. And we can only do that if we start moving the discussion of land use planning out of a boardroom or a 400-page report and into something where we can actually start measuring ourselves. So giving it just a boring definition is we take a piece of land and we decide an activity that we want to undertake on. That's the basic thing that we should ask ourselves. What's an activity we want on a piece of land? But why it's not so good always being boring, because it's the easy way out. And now there's some consultants that's brilliant, but there's some of them that really does a copy and paste job when we do inland use planning, because we push to the end of time. The client wants his financial provision. They want to see their rehabilitation reports. Oh, inland use planning, let's quickly type up a couple of sentences. So we, by making it sometimes boring, we really don't expand ourselves into what is the possibility of really thinking about inland use planning a little bit more. I've seen inland use plans in Africa where people look at repurposing pits, doing big conservation, putting in tourism in a country where they actually just want food at the moment, or they just want a house. Why are we building Sun City? Because it was the easy way out. And at the same time, did we then really think about the complexity in the previous slide? If you just put up a Sun City, did we think about the ecological side, the social side? Do we have the people? Do we have the skills? The political side, is there really going to be people in any case who wants to come and stay there? Cultural, economic, I can continue for hours. And now I want to sit with this pictures at the bottom. On the left-hand side, you see this team, highly successful rehabilitation. The inland use was achieved. It's called biodiversity in that case. But look at the guy next to him. He's not going to be happy if he also stands there, because what does he do there? He feels not secure in the middle of nowhere. He doesn't have a house. He can't decide how to create jobs on that, what to do with his family, and how is he going to make money out of it. And that brings me to the picture on the right-hand side. That's successful in land use, and it's only dependent if the guys on the left don't just rehabilitate by thinking one thing, ecological. It's about thinking about a little bit more, the social, political, cultural, economic. Okay, just some examples once again, why we fail in some instances, and just two or three examples quickly, where in the east and west end, if you guys stay in that area in Gauteng, drive around, you'll see historically it was defined as making it wilderness land, and that land use resulted in informal settlements establishing onto it. And that means we didn't really think about what's the inland use, because now the inland use is really contributing to unemployment, contributing to crime, because the informal settlements came in there, because the land use wasn't desirable for the area. The people didn't want wilderness. In Mozambique, there was a project where the operation went and established this high biodiversity value forest. And a couple of years later, they got back to the forest and was chopped down because the people needed that land for their livestock. They wanted to graze it. So once again, the wrong thinking. We didn't think about what the people want or what's on the political and social side of end land use philosophy. And we see in the KZN, where I am based, where a lot of the sand mines bring back their land to grazing. It's easy to establish a lot of great grasslands on a sloped area, but one rainfall event, and I think climate change again as well in land use planning, the erosion and the runoff, poor grazing planning, just opening it up to the communities. Today we sit, it looks worse than it did when there was an actual mine, if you go and look at the erosion and the runoff. So really that was incomplete thinking, great initiative, but just putting grass there does not mean it will be successful and sustainable in the future and actually contribute to the people. So is it really worth us spending all this time thinking about land? And definitely is it worth the effort? And I believe so. You know, land, just looking at it historically, thousands of years ago, it's seen as a sign of power. There's a reason the Romans fought for land for many years. There's a reason today we sit with fights. Yes, there's political things if we look at the Israel-Palestine conflicts, but if we look at the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, there's a lot more involved. It really looks at the value of that land, why you want that. So land really historically has a value, and South Africa is not different today. Remember, while I'm saying this, that you as an inland use planner who has to make a decision with the inland use is the custodian of that land until it goes to wherever. So that land and this fight for thousands of years sits in your hand. South Africa today, if we look at the passion on land redistribution, the land claims is people want land. And people want land because they've seen historically how it actually helped their tribe or their community grow and become better if they have access to that land, because there's potential. So we can't underestimate the value of creating this land post mining. And you'll see in my introduction as well that, you know, I mentioned some figures in there from Stats SA about how many mines are rehabilitated, how many not. We can quickly do calculations of how many thousands of hectares of land that sits stagnant. I'll show you some examples later where we've actually went and calculated the profit value of land per hectare. We can even move that to per square meters. Now, if we don't do good planning, good rehabilitation, make sure our inland use plan is sustainable, and I'll show you what I mean about sustainability, then we won't have that value per hectare, and South Africa is just going to go further beyond where we are at the moment in Africa as a whole as well. So it's really create value out of the land because you have the power to apply money. And I never underestimate the word financial provision. Everybody sees financial provision is this liability. You can think about it differently as well. You sit in a position where you can spend hundreds of millions to create a brand new business that can employ people and into a longer period than the short period of a mine. So look at it a bit different as well. You have the time and the people around you as well. So we really can't afford something like stagnant land or wilderness. It's in land use planning is not closure. It is also not just based on ecological or or environmental stability. In land use is not supposed to be something that objective is stable, non-polluting, and safe. That's the objective of rehabilitation. That's not the objective of inland use planning. So when we start now, let's jump into how do I really think about inland use planning, and how do we decide what inland use we propose to be at our clients or our own operations. We started a guy that decades ago already started thinking about this for us. And it's a guy called Maslow, and he's got the hierarchy of human needs. Inland use comes down to the people. So what do they need? And that should be the first question we ask for. If the mine leaves, what do people want? And this Maslow hierarchy should be the basis of that thinking. If we work in Africa, we can't follow the global trends of developed nations. Developed nations are a lot higher up in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They build economies at 7-8% a year. They want to make sure that housing, everybody has a 2-bedroom house and a swimming pool. In South Africa, we're not a developed nation. We're not looking for recreational space or nice natural areas. We're really looking for something that can support food security, water, other ecosystem, goods and services, accommodation, being safe, supporting people when we've got climate change issues such as fires and flooding that we see a lot. So focusing on Africa, you can use Maslow for anything in the world, but really, what's the basic needs? And those are the type of things we should think of when we do the first contribution to inland use planning. So I think another point here, I'm saying something, if you look at Africa, food security and water and employment is also supporting our fiscus through taxes. Don't just give a guy a fishing rod and let him teach him how to catch fish. Agriculture started like that, but agriculture grew because he caught too many fish and he started selling it to his neighbor. And that's what you want to develop. You want to develop a microeconomy where you are. And that should be one of the goals of inland use planning. Okay. Just quickly putting together my thoughts on how I further think about it. Now that I've gone through in the area where we are, let's say we're in Africa, our needs are very basic on the Maslow hierarchy. Let's go and see what the rehabilitation really can give to us. And I say inland use planning must happen first, and then rehabilitation must try and achieve it. But that is in a lot of cases not the situation. We can't always get it to something that we want as the best inland use planning. So working with your rehabilitation teams and understanding the end state of rehabilitation. I can't emphasize how important it is to have success or relinquishment criteria for you as an operation or as a consultant. It does not need to be massively complex. It can be very basic, but have a point in time where you believe that's where our rehabilitation will be. Because without that, I can't say, well, what can we do with this land at that point where you believe it should be once you've done your work. What are the local factors that drive land use? Got a slide on that. Of course, it comes down to opportunities and constraints. I'll never underestimate the SWOT analysis. We'll touch on that as well. I'll show you where we link opportunities and constraints to a site as an example. And then listing in land use options and really working through of those and prioritizing and categorizing them. And once we understand what's the in land use, that's not where it should stop, because I promise you next year another consultant or the next environmental manager, he'll have his own idea. And the only way to move further and build annually on in land use planning, same as rehabilitation or any type of work that we do, is to build more fat into this. We need to look at in land use planning about what skills do we need and how many once we decide what the in land use is, how much capital, the governance and entity structures, the growth potential. We, as inland use planners, start off with what we call primary production, where we don't employ many people, but the idea is to do over a period of time to get to that point of 5 people becoming 160 people in 5 years' time. It's unlikely we will ever replace the amount of employment a mine leaves behind once it goes to closure. But we also, it's irresponsible for us to say, let's just put cattle there and give 5 people jobs. So we need to really think further on the growth potential, and we need to document and challenge ourselves on it. Okay, so let's jump into this type of thinking that I briefly discussed. This is just for myself when I use it. After I looked at where I'm operating and what's the needs of the people. What will the rehabilitation guys tell me they're going to leave behind for me? I take all of that information. I start considering that, looking at 21 different points in these 5 factors that I started putting together. Now, it might not be complete, but that is what I use for myself. When we decide on our end land use, we have to, firstly, and that's what most of us do, is really consider the biophysical. Do we have soil, and how much soil? If we have soil, is it deep enough? Should we look at irrigation, crop production? But can we do that if we don't consider the hydrology? Do we have water? Is it clean water? Do we need to treat that water? It's nice if we've got that soil and we've got that water and we've got that climate, but then do we actually have accessibility? Is there logistics? Is the market close by? If I produce maize or if I produce tomatoes, my competition is 5 kilometers from market. I'm 50 kilometers from market. Is it really worth me then looking at that? So don't ever see any of these factors in isolation. It might be great for that area, but in the end of the day, we said we're thinking economy, not just ecology. Looking at physical factors and the repurposing, even though making a dump grazing is repurposing. A lot of guys talk about repurposing, taking the buildings that's there and reusing it. Using our example again, let's say we do crop production, the market is close by, the climate is there, the hydrology is there. All of these factors I started considering. All of these factors, can they utilize something like a building? We need storage areas. Can we repurpose one of those buildings for a store? We need administrative offices now if we grow into the future. We can't just think about what we have there, and that's where point 3, 4, and 5 is. Probably point 4 is a little bit of what do we have. So let's consider our inland use options on what's the human resources we have, what's the skills that's available. Let's say we have a mine of 1,000 people. In the end of the day, what we usually see is 60 or 70% of that migrate out of town. They are your engineers. They are the guys who built up savings. They know mining is going to end. Everybody knows that. They move out of town. So we don't really think about them and we're going to replace their jobs. They will look after themselves. It's really these guys. It's the truck driver on the ground. It's the security personnel. The guy who was there, some of the guys who semi-migrated there, that's going to stay behind. And that's really what's going to be our workforce, our labor contingent, our employment need at the inland use point. And skills. Let's say we do have engineers, and there's 40 engineers that will stay behind in whatever town it might be. Then I'm going to build a consulting company with good Wi-Fi and bandwidth, and we'll be the best engineering company in South Africa. But like I said, that's highly unlikely. We'll have the engineers, they move around. We will have those people that drove the truck. So if he drives a truck, can I transfer his skills quickly and fast enough? And is that transfer of whatever salary or economic value at that point also part of my inland use? I'm not going to make an engineer a tractor driver. So I'm not going to do crop production. I'm going to do consulting. Operational team, do we have it? Third parties, we've got NGOs, corporations that all team up. What is available that will also support you on ideas that's already there. Thinking commercial, and that's something we really miss a lot, especially the funding source. As a consultant, my clients always come to me and say, hey, Divan, I want 1,000 people need jobs at closure. That's what the CEO said. Please get it in land use. And I said, great, we do it. We build Sun City for you. We'll employ 3,000 people, but I need 30 billion rand. Then everybody falls out of the bus and everybody's angry. The CEO is angry. But that's what you wanted. You wanted 1,000 people. So really funding source and how much money you are willing to spend is one of the core things you have to think of from day one. And that's why I said, if we're not going to spend 30 billion rand, but we want 1,000 jobs, we can only achieve it by being a catalyst to start small with primary and raw production material. Now I'm specific to South Africa or Africa, and giving it the opportunity and the skills to grow into that bigger business. No business starts at 1,000, they start with 1, and we must never forget that. And policy, we underestimate sometimes our local government. They're really doing a great job in some of the areas and have improved significantly. I think there's a bit of a failure on national level. We've got a great national development plan that will already use the inland use planner, give you an indication of what does our country need. and you will have support from the political side for that as well. But don't underestimate your IDPs, the spatial development frameworks, all those type of documents that's in the municipal areas. Link and edge onto those. Be a little bit boring. Don't always try and innovate and reinvent the wheel. There might already be a solution that's already supported by government for you in that area. And then I can talk a lot about the rest, but really it comes about the need and desirability of that area. An example I want to give you, talking about take that land and create an inland use, but really, if we believe inland, there will not be a successful inland use and the people don't want it, spend your money elsewhere. Give them big retrenchment packages to make them move to a growing town or a growing city. Don't just focus yourself on what they have to do at that point in time. Sometimes we have to only make it safe, non-polluting and stable, and rather move our people to elsewhere where they might be more successful to grow economy on a national scale. Okay, I can continue that for days, but I'm going to move along. I want to touch on one point is once again, not reinventing the wheel, is really looking at regional land use. These two examples are South African examples. This is in the Kalahari. If I have to think in land use planning on this specific underground mine, look at what's happening around it. The people have been there for hundreds of years. They know what works. That room there has been staying there for 3 generations. He wouldn't stay there if he wasn't making money. That's not how the world works. So go and see what he does and really use that as the first thing when you plan about what you want to do here. And the same on the right-hand side. This is in Mpumalanga. See what's happening around it. Yes, the biophysical factors and climate influence 99% of that. But I'm not going to create a Kalahari game farm of camel thorn trees in this area. And the same on this side. I'm not going to put up massive irrigation in this area. Yes, I might have that opportunity, but that's not where we start thinking. So really zooming out a little bit and looking a lot more regional can already start stimulating your brain. What should be the inland use? Okay. Once you've looked at these factors and you actually have a good idea what the rear guys are leaving for you, you have a good idea of what's all the factors that might influence your decision on what the inland use or inland use options are. Bring it back to your site level. Delineate all your areas, your pits, your administration areas. There's never one single inland use. There's many on any site. So really start breaking it down a little bit more. And put the opportunities and constraints of each of those sites. You might have deep soils where your administration areas is, but of course in your pit not. So you're not going to put those under the same ideas and concepts. Same with your tailings. Also very important on your logistics infrastructure. Just another example, leaving a railway line, if you start producing bulk commodities on the agricultural sector, don't break your railway line. You have access to that port. That's to your market. Also consider what do we do with that? How do we repurpose our logistics infrastructure, not just our buildings, which is sometimes where thinking stops behind it. So now we actually know, and you can do a SWOT analysis as well, which is most of the time what we also put in place after those criteria understanding, after we've delineated per area its opportunities, constraints. We understand what the needs are of the people, and I'm going to emphasize on the social a lot later, but touch on it again. Talk to the people. You know that they actually are client. That is the people we need to satisfy, because they're the people we're going to leave behind. So understanding the people, what their needs are, your opportunities or constraints, getting a good idea of what is the capital we have available, and what's the objective of the mining operation. The thinking should move to the next step where we list all the inland uses. Now, we on average list about 50 to 60 different inland uses. If you see on the right-hand side, that's just a snippet out of one of our Excel tables. We're going to define them into and start reducing it into what really is something that really will work and almost certain. So that's something we take forward. You almost take a project approach from concept phase where we were 10 slides ago. We're moving now in the pre-feasibility. We do options analysis, removing the fatal flaws before we go to feasibility, which is more on the economic side. So my advice is always, and I did touch that, start with primary production on your land. And you'll see I'm very pro-agriculture, especially as a South African. Food security is important to us, and I'll show you why as well. Start with the raw product. Just put cattle down when you start off. It doesn't mean you have to be a cattle farmer and the CEO says we're boring. Go through the value chain. But starting with cattle, starting small-scale farming with communities, they low capital intensive, less risk to get off the ground if we're time constrained. And we always have the land available for that. It doesn't mean you have to stop there. And that's why after you've decided what the primary production is you want to employ on your site, be it crop production, livestock production, it can be a waste management site as well, is start going through the value chain, because that's where we want to see the employment increase. That's where we want to see the salaries increase. That's where our profit margin starts going up as well. It becomes a lot more capital intensive. You don't want to, as a mining operation, spend 30 billion now. But if you have a business that's growing over time, it might build up capital or a balance sheet that can facilitate that 30 billion. Now, the value chain, at the end of the day, if we look at that example again on cattle farming that I recently worked on, we employ about one person in the Kalahari per 1,500 hectares. That's not a lot of people. Oh, we need massive scale. But if we work at a scale of 20,000 hectares, and we've got cattle, around 1,000 cattle on 20,000 hectares, and we start establishing an abattoir at 10 animals a day, then we employ 14 people. If we move from that abattoir a little bit bigger to a butchery, we move up to 160 people if we move away from carcasses to secondary cuts, such as your rump steak or your chop or whatever you put on a braai. So really consider the value chain so that we don't stop in land use at the primary basic need. We must have that in land use be able to follow a value chain up, or we're never going to get that business going. And also think supporting services. Don't just think I'm a cattle farmer and I've got meat. You need logistics. So there could be a logistics arm onto that. So secondary services, utilizing vehicles, utilizing your logistics and export and import infrastructure. A packaging side to this as well. I'm showing you now the jobs that we can create by just taking a cow out of the veld and loading it onto a trailer, taking that cow a little bit further and breaking it down into secondary cuts. You've got the packaging included as well. We can continue for days with marketing, waste management, but you're really seeing how I say start basic, but it has the potential to grow into some massive business. But it comes down to de-risking it immediately by starting with the basics of primary production. Okay, so looking at a bit of an example, and I said I'll touch on the food security in South Africa. So looking at what's the need in South Africa, the most recent food index that Shoprite brought out just a month or so ago projects that South Africa, by 2025, 49% of our South Africans will be food insecure. Now, if you go and you do any land use planning and want to build some city, you've got it wrong, because our country needs food, and this is a clear factual reference to that. So really, South Africa needs food security, and that's why I said that's where we start thinking on the philosophy side before we get practical. Of course, opportunity constraint, we can't produce food if we don't have soil, if we don't have water, if the climate is not there. Yes, we've got mining operations that might be in that position. Then this is the wrong example for you, but you'll be able to think about that second one. We've got good quality scale grazing, low capital investment, but low employment rate if we start with something like cattle farming or livestock farming when we do meat production. Nice thing to also think of if we think about food security. Food security is not just about giving people food. If we look at some of the nations in Africa, where they've got massive fish production, protein is great, but the human body does not survive just about keeping a stomach full. We need diversity as well. So keep that in mind as well. If you decide to inland, you should support food security. In this example of food security, we really have to support our National Development Plan. I mentioned it includes significant contributions to rural development and agriculture as a priority. So you're going to be on the wrong track when it comes to a national point. I said in the end of the day, in land use, we all pack our bags and we leave. we leave it to the people. We leave it to the people, we leave it to the government as well. And we need to know what they want, or no one's going to support you in your inland use. Okay. Yeah, interesting. South Africa, if you guys know, but in 2023, we are a net importer of maize. That's not good. We sit with so much land. I drive through Zululand a lot and I see 300,000 hectares standing there, which we can use for production. Same in the Free State. So we shouldn't be importing maize. That food production or food security does not just support people. We should be exporting maize, which supports our fiscus in South Africa. So let's see, for myself, I decided now the need is food security. My land I've got available is not deep soils, a lot of water. I can really do livestock. I decided on cattle production. I said to you, let's start at the primary driver, because at the end of that, I can't tell my client I need 30 billion rand. I need to keep it low, but I need to show him I can get to his employment objectives in a different way. The primary driver is really livestock or cattle production. That's for my example. I can build this into a feedlot, and I already showed you some examples how we increase employment in a feedlot, abattoir, move it all the way to retail, all the additional services that we can create. So when you start in land use planning, build yourself a diagram. If you know what is the inland use you want to pursue, know what you have. You now have a farm. You've seen that. You've looked at your constraints and opportunities. From my example here, I've got a farm. I've got shallow soils, good grazing land, nice scale, and I've got the market that's available. So I've got a farm. Do I just use the natural grassland and my stock and genetics, the inputs, to output into cow-calf production? Yes, I can. But like I said, I will be creating one job per 1,500 hectares. Do I decide to take it further and do some feed or pasture production? Maybe I've got a tailings dam where my soil can be ameliorated to develop a feedlot, taking it a little bit further. Now, I'm moving from that one job per 1,500 hectares and actually tripling that with a feedlot in place. If I have a feedlot, I can sell my product for a lot more money. The greater potential for further capital, self-sustaining capital, to grow this specific business. This diagram can go all the way on to the consumer, and you really want to be at the consumer. You at least want to think towards the consumer, because that's where your money is. All these guys in the middle make a little bit of each, but you can be the guy sitting here and making this entire middle. There's a farmer in the Free State, Nick Serfontein, if you guys know him. So Nick started off as a cattle farmer as well. At the moment, he's got butcheries and restaurants in Johannesburg, and only about 13% of his revenues from his cattle farming. The rest of the money he makes with restaurants and his butcheries. So it just shows you what difference it makes going through the value chain, both from employment perspective and from generating money, generating cash, being sustainable. You can develop this diagram for crop production. You can develop this diagram we recently did it for game farming, taking it through its value chain, such as the ecotourism side, bringing in hunting. Hunting then creates a meat industry. A year ago, national policy was brought out by our government to support the game meat production as an export option. So know what's happening in your country when you do inland use planning. Your hunting then supports other alternative industries such as taxidermy. Your tourism brings in accommodation. Accommodation requires easy skills transfer. I can make a truck driver, cleaner, or a waiter in a restaurant within a couple of weeks. I don't need to send him to university for 4 years. So really looking at what the skill transfer is in this value chain is also important. We can do tourism, moving it to taxidermy and the photography side. Really what I want to show is, if you plan basic and your CapEx only allows you to really start with the basics, don't forget about the rest. Keep it in your plan. Give your client or your operation or the person taking over from you the opportunity to achieve more than just leaving something where a couple of cattle is walking on. Okay, now that we've decided what we do and we believe it can be successful into the long term, it can be a business, the need is there, the market is there. You must bring in the more complex side of it that's outside of our science thinking. And we already started that with market analysis in the previous slide. You need to turn into an economist. You need to turn into a financial person to look at your capital spend. Like I said, a client's not going to give you in 2022 in this example, this total budget, I think was close to 500 million for this project. We're not going to give you 500 million and say, go spend it now because you have to spend it in 3 months because we're closing. That's not how reasonable business works. Taking your capital, breaking it down into when you actually need to spend it, when your primary production starts operating, when you want to go through your value chains, and that you'll do later, but you'll see your capital jump significantly. Maybe your client wants to stop here. If we look at this capital budget and say, hey guys, I just want to spend 50 million. For 50 million, we can put up fences. We can get our agricultural support infrastructure. We can buy some cattle, and then this is where we stop. But if our client decides, well, let's go further and scale up our cattle production, we'll need a little bit more money. But we can link that to people then as well. And this is what this next slide is. I take that same capital and I link how that capital spend translates into employment. The last thing I'll show you how it translates into profit. Once again in 2022, we're employing 36 people. Majority are sitting in the primary production of game in this example, primary production of beef. That's where we're employing 36 people. But let's spend another 120 million. Let's get to 2025. Now we've started bringing in the value chain. Look at the abattoir that we started building in 2025. Our cattle feedlot started here as well. We brought in some horticulture in the specific project. We had some excess water and infrastructure we wanted to repurpose. So we're moving from 36 people up to 250 people. But once again, and that's where I think as the mining operations, you guys must keep money in mind. I can create 250 people, but I need 500 million, please. But I can give you 36 people, then I only need 50 million. Okay. One thing that I always try and do, and it's not as easy to help our clients decide on how much money you want to spend, is really linking a capital cost for one job. It's not always the same everywhere. It might be 10,000 Rand per job capital if I want to do primary production. But if I want to go further, I want to spend a million Rand per job. Depends on the spend that the client wants to do. And guys, in land use, like I said, it fails sometimes because we just leave it in a state that rehabilitation sits us with, and really it's going to come down to money. You'll see in the East and West Rand examples, there was grazing, and it's nice. It can make money, but no one planned it properly. There was no grazing systems in place. There was no capital budget planning. And we must bring in land use planning a lot earlier in our life cycle during our operations, because any business is cash flow negative. A lot of these businesses will be cash flow negative. You want to really know at one point in time, will I be cash flow positive? This is only at the end of year 3, will be cash flow positive. I can't leave this business in year 0 and say we're closed. They're just going to fail because they're running into money troubles. Go and do your financial planning. Look at, we know you're going to be cash flow positive or not. And if you're not, you're doing the wrong in land use. Okay. I'm going to move a little bit faster. Like I said, I like talking a lot, and we probably won't stop this discussion here on anything. Is consider other things as well. There's multi-benefits, carbon sequestration, energy production, also a significant need in Africa and South Africa. Don't forget about municipalities. It doesn't help. You've got this great land use here, but there's no rates and taxes and services. Your sewage fails, your electricity supply fails, your water supply fails, and your roads fail. So really the municipality shouldn't fail. It should form part of your land use planning. What happens if we are successful in doing good in land use planning? This is very high level. We're bringing back ecological services. So now I'm thinking scientist again. Ecological services, the things that businesses get built on because it creates opportunity, because it services a need. We support basic human needs and keep empowering our people and their families, not just as one person. He's got his family with him as well. We said we'll support the needs, food security, all our national needs. Drive down food costs. If we don't import, inflation drops. If we generate electricity and we give it at a cheaper rate, inflation drops. So there's additional benefits by having a land use that's got economic gain. Of course, it reduces crime, because a lot of people have jobs. If you're reasonably into welcome, you'll see what I mean. Increase in skills. Don't ever forget that land has a title deed. The title deed has a value. There's value on a balance sheet. It can support further capital. If you rehabilitate properly, we can sit with land with a value from 150,000 rand per hectare if it's got nice water availability to 7,000 rand a hectare if we move to the more arid regions. Land has a value on a title deed as well. It's an asset if we rehabilitate it and use it properly. And of course, easier closure certificates. I haven't tested it. It's an idea. If you already have a good inland use, you started during your operational phase or a good plan in place, it's highly likely you've got better motivation for closure than just saying this dump will be stable, we'll be okay, Mr. Officer from the DMRE. If we fail, we sit, what we do in a lot of cases as well, thousands of hectares of safe and non-polluting land, nice grass on it, and a big latent liability budget that sits there. Money shouldn't be sitting idling in this country. We shouldn't be leaving non-polluting hectares of grass, none of which helps our people at the end of the day. And mining then fails, actually, if inland use planning and inland use fails, because mining is all about upliftment of communities. Yes, your shareholder in Sweden doesn't think that, but that's his business. Mining in South Africa is the resource of the people, and that land is also the resource. So mining will fail. And that we really waste our money on our social and labour plan budget. Shouldn't we rather spend it on developing passive income alternative economies immediately that just assimilates over time as we rehabilitate? So, like Spider-Man said, this quote, this great power comes great responsibility. So as an inland use planner, see why I'm saying it's complex and you must be stressed a little bit more. It's really a big responsibility, whatever you decide on a piece of paper. So your mindset's important. You're responsible for alternative economy. You must think broad, retrenchment packages I mentioned, move people out of the area if you're not confident this inland use will be successful. And then, include in land use planning your startup cost or your financial provision. People are going to kick me for that. I say, well, if you do latent risk, put in a closure, put in the price of a tractor, 20 cattle and some fencing. If that's not there, are we really achieving an inland use? No, we can't just say put in money just to vegetate. And us as an industry, we're highly competitive, but we must collaborate, share experience, do trials, share our knowledge. It's really an integrated approach in land use planning and create microeconomies. Don't leave it wilderness. If someone says wilderness, I cry. And it's about what the people want. I said that a couple of times in this presentation. And keep it simple is the last line I've got there. Create one job during operations. You'll see by the time you close, you'll already have 20. Don't trial for years. We don't need to trial meat or livestock production or maize production. We need to try how it works. The climate is there, the soil, water is there. Don't go trial it. Make sure your soil can contribute to that production. So start small and really start now to start assimilating, start the inland use now, get it cash flow positive. By the time you leave, that business will already be settled. So my final thought is that complexity and the responsibility you have is when you plan people's future, which this is, will you really put your money where your mouth or your report is? Because in 20 years' time when that mine closes and your name was on that report, or you made that decision, you are responsible for that person, and that's going to sit at closure. Okay, that's me quickly. Anya, over to you if there's questions.
Thanks, Divan. That was an excellent presentation. I think we definitely speak the same language. So, Teresa, I don't know if you can, it looks like everyone can unmute now. So I'll mute myself. If there's any questions, please just raise your hand or type it in the chat. I see there's already a few hands. So I'll mute myself and then hand over to you, Divan. Thanks.
Okay. Can I just ask Anya or Teresa, can you guys request number 1, 2, 3, 4 questions?
Yes, so I see Lindile has a hand up, so let's start there.
Lindile, I'm listening.
Greetings, everyone. I am Lindy Shozi from Association for Rural Advancement, which is a land rights organization. And thank you so much for your presentation. Very insightful, very informative. But there's an aspect that I was hoping that it would be covered around Spluma being a very a blockage, I could say, whereby the planning might then interfere with the rights of that particular land. And then with this presentation, I can see there are many opportunities being prevailed to us, but how do we then answer to the rights that might be infringed in that certain area that area is looking to be restored?
Yeah, great. But you're 100% correct. And like I said, I can talk about this for days. And that's why, yeah, Spluma does create constraints on what we can really do on land. And if you look at the factors to be considered, that's why I put political drivers and regulation in one of those factors to be considered. It doesn't help me think of something nice that doesn't tick all of those 21 boxes that I tried to discuss. So yes, Spluma does create constraints, but it does not remove us from having a successful inland use. But what like you said, you hope it will be covered. We can cover this for days. And I actually had in the end of my presentation, I said, I will buy a plane ticket for everybody who wants to come and sit with me and let's talk about this. I took it out because I think it might be expensive. But yeah, please, I think use that. If we should sit around the table and think about the constraints of Spluma to develop in land use thinking a lot more. We must do so, and we need your experience in your specific profession for that. Okay. Then I see Mariette, you also have a question.
Yes, thank you very much, Divan. Your presentation, I think, was extremely practical. We are faced, as you know, with mine closure within the goldfields of the Witwatersrand. Not one single closure certificate, however, had been issued. I think the last man standing will be Goldfields itself, deep mine, with a life of mine of 80 years. But I just want to ask your expert opinion on the Bokamoso Barona initiative of Sibanye-Stillwater, which will focus on large-scale catalytic agro-industrial and renewable energy projects. And according to their concept note, all producers within the program will adopt production principles that will enhance and promote farm biodiversity, improve soil health, support nutrient recycling, agroforestry, carbon sequestration, and other regenerative practices. So this is my first question. And if I may be permitted also to ask your opinion, expert opinion, on the degraded land after a tailing storage facility had been reprocessed, because often the soil contains residual radioactivity or sometimes also elevated levels of metals. We do not consider, of course, residential developments or even grazing of cattle on these land use to be sustainable land uses. It would be high risk. What is your opinion on using this land for landfill sites? I think you did mention biomass, perhaps, and industrial development. And then I also just want to ask, with regards to the land that has now been, where there is a proliferation of illegal mining, that of course also creates significant impacts for communities and future sustainable land use. And then my last point I just want to ask, in working with communities that are characterized by widespread poverty, we often find that medium and long-term benefits do not resonate. In other words, inter- and intragenerational equity. What often is needed is immediate benefits. So how would you suggest, should we educate or capacitate these communities to also look to future sustainable livelihood opportunities? Thank you.
Right, Marie, thanks. Maybe to jump into your first question on the rehabilitated gold dump areas, and we know what's the inherent risks, pollution risk, etc. we sit with. And I want to make it clear that we must differentiate between what is the job of the rehabilitation expert and the inland use planner. As an inland use planner, that's why I said I need to know what are you leaving me with. And it's highly likely if you leave me something that you can't bring in the criteria such as a certain constituency of that soil structure or that water availability, then the inland use might be there is none. Then we stick with stable, sustainable, rather renegotiate using your money for something else in the end of the day. Some land might not be successful. You can spend billions and get it to that point, but is that the right way of spending our money? Thinking of my rehabilitation brain on the other side, I recently wrote a memo for a mine on a waste rock dump to not plant vegetation on the inner slopes of that dump that's towards the pit. It's 125 million rand that we could save, and that 125 million rand can allow me to put in 20 kudus or 5 cattle on those 90 hectares. But 125 million rand, taking it and spending it elsewhere, such as buying a productive or creating a productive farm, is a better way of spending my money. So clear differentiation, what rehabilitation leaves us with, will only be the start of where you can decide what is the inland use. And like I said, in some cases, it might be nothing in any case. On your other questions, if you think about initiatives, there's a lot of great initiatives. I can start with Glencore initiatives. They had that winter wheat projects. They ran the Impact Catalyst. I sat yesterday about an entire recycling project which looks at waste. You were talking about waste. If we look at needs in South Africa and thinking circular economy, I didn't even touch on that in inland use planning yet. And the circular economy, South Africa is running out of waste space. We're generating more than the space we have at the moment. So using, we've always asked, what do you use a pit for? For me, a mine pit, if the logistics is there, and of course the water table and all those factors, it can be a great example of a good inland use example. On the Sibanye, and I think that's why I said that there's a lot of good initiatives taking place. Probably today's discussion is not for the bigger miners who have got the luxury of spending hundreds of millions a year on trials and other opportunities such as Impact Catalysts and all the things you mentioned. Some of the guys, a lot of the mining operations we work with is small. They say, Divan, I've got R1 million this year. What do we do with this? At the end of life of mine, I've got zero money left. I can just give you what I can. But how do we help them? Because that's also a big part. And if you look at the mines that hasn't closed or receives a closed certificate, it's not the Glencores and the Exxaros. It's really the overnight guy, the smaller guy, and that's where you've got a lot more easier opportunity, I guess, to think a bit about inland use planning better. But Mariette, I think you've answered some of your questions as well. There's a lot of complexity in it, and just these two questions I've had here already shows that this presentation is already with you guys about. It's not as easy as just drawing a map and putting in a report and invoicing a client. It's really a complex way of thinking. Okay, next question.
Divan, I see there's a question in the chat.
I believe we as mining are prepared to spend money on closed and alternative land use as well as water treatment. But is the status of closed certificates at South Africa, if all this work is done, will the miner receive a certificate and absolved of future aspects? I actually have it was Nico asked from Glencore. I actually put in a lot of our presentations, where does inland use planning fit in? Now, inland use, like I said, I believe it can support or motivate a closed certificate, but the closure certificate and the start of an inland use or inland use happening is not mutually exclusive to each other. You might never have a closed certificate, but you'll have an inland use. The regulatory is not just the only driver for inland use. Inland use can support the regulatory driver, a closed certificate, but we shouldn't say we get closed certificate the day we start our inland use, because that's successful rehabilitation. Inland use can start anytime, and it's not dependent on mine closure certificates. It can, however, support, I believe, getting closure, because we're leaving something that is proven to be safe, stable, at least in the short term, creating employment. There's no way you will not be able to motivate better over inland use that's already taking place. On your second question, I think it says, will you be absolved of all future aspects? I think our law makes it clear you will not be absolved of all future aspects, unless that liability can be taken over if I decide, and that's probably one of our long-term projects we're running as well, is if I come to a mine and tell you I take over the entire liability, you could absolve yourself partially, I guess. There's always a little bit into it, but there's probably more commercial agreements and lawyers who can remove you from that liability. But you could remove yourself, and I think we have to remove ourselves from that liability. Otherwise, you as a miner must stop being a miner and actually turn into a land use expert, because then that liability sticks with you forever. You tell yourself that title deed, whether I dig it up, backfill it again, put on crops or cattle, I'll forever look after that land. Then you're not absolving yourself, you're turning into a land use specialist. But that's a mind shift change in mining that needs to happen. Okay. There's another question. Can rehabilitated land produce biomass at the same rate as non-affected land? And how does that affect economies? Okay, that's a 2-hour discussion, but it can. We're scientists, engineers, and lawyers and economists work together. Definitely, there's no reason it shouldn't. But it really comes down to what is the specific area that you operate in. And biomass production is the right thing to do. Okay. Is there another question? At an acceptable cost? Yeah, I touched on the cost a lot. What is acceptable cost? You know, an acceptable cost to a lot of our clients is R0, especially mining. Super cycles done, we're turning into lean machines now. So R0 is the acceptable cost. Anything above, beyond that must be very well motivated. And that's why motivating, spending 100 million rand to create grazing is not worth the money. But saying that 100 million rands worth of grazing can create 50 jobs and increase that through a value chain to 150 jobs, that if the 100 million rand has got the skills and the entrepreneurial spirit behind it, that can happen. Because it's going to cost us money to do a retrenchment process in any case. It's going to cost us money to close a mine. Okay. Another question. I'm answering these very short and sweet. Maybe you guys must get into a plane and come and see me. Another day, you guys say, as an expert, you know, it's quite new how we operate. And if I have to say I'm an expert, I'll bring a team of 10 with, because there's 10 guys who will be able to answer the detailed questions you guys have. So never just think of one person. Don't just be a scientist thinking you can do a land use plan. Gwen, you've got a question.
How's it, Divan? And thank you so much for an awesome presentation. Thank you also to our team who've put this together, Teresa and Anya, much appreciated. And thanks very much to this huge variety of people that we have in the room who've come to join us for this chat. Yeah, I think just looking at all the interest and the high quality of the questions, I'm thinking this looks like a really good pre-conference workshop. Is that something that people would like to see? If so, can we see some hands? Or just a reaction from attendees?
Definitely, and I think that's what myself and Anya on a previous presentation wants, is to show you guys that this is not a once-off. I actually already started thinking, what's my next web chat? Where I'm going to break it down. Your questions is already leading or guiding me into the next step of it. So yeah, two hands up from my side already, and I see there's many more.
Okay, fantastic. I like the sound of that. Thank you very much. And yeah, let's leave it to any other participants who'd like to continue.
Teresa, who's next on our list?
There's a few hands up now. Looks like Maya.
Yes, I'm listening, Maya. You can go ahead. You might be on mute. There we go.
Good morning, and thank you so much, Devin, for such a good presentation. I was actually just listening in, and I think I might have sort of just raised my hand accidentally, but it was quite an informative presentation, and so, but I will hold up for now. Thank you.
Who's next on our list, Teresa?
Bolale. I see Bolale, and then Mike also has a hand up.
Hey, Pushpali, you're welcome. I'm listening. Maybe Mike, you can jump into it. Mike, you're-
Okay. All right. Sorry, I just came in late. Am I now audible?
Yes, you are. I can hear you.
Okay. Pretty well. Thanks, Mr. Divan, for that presentation. It is a bit much more informative. That not only is rehabilitative planning mainly to get us back to the original landscape, but also to have an economic value post dated that time, like if you're saying. But I also had an initiative where I was talking to a guy who's got Dr. Parati, I think from India, where he's talking about introducing what we call a Bima bamboo, which is supposed to be high in carbon sequestration. So I just wanted to let you know that I'll be coming over also to come and relate on that, because what we want is not only rehabilitative planning to bring back the people on baseline, but to also increase our livelihoods for the people who are left behind by the closure of the mines. So
Yeah.
I think the livelihood aspect is the most touching aspect of which I'm looking at.
Yeah, and just some a quick comment on that. I mean, sometimes I'm a lot of biodiversity guys, because I would like to bring in some like a vetiver grass from Thailand, because the production mass is huge, and I can throw it on, you know, highly contaminated land as well, and use it for biomass production, energy production. I would like to plant 3,500 hectares of Mexican prickly pears in the Northern Cape, because that's a smart protein, also turns to bioethanol. So maybe not always biodiversity is great, but it might be a better use of that land. What's another question? Mike, you're next on the list. Mike, I see you still. There we.
I think there's something wrong with his mic.
Yeah. Mike, you can type it as well. Well, Mike's another question. Mike, it looks like you're also getting a plane ticket.
Divan, I think, will you please also add your contact details just in the chat if we miss a question? I think there's something wrong with Mike's microphone. I see it seems like he dropped off now. Not sure. Can you just pop your email address in the chat? And then, yeah, if there's any questions we missed, please send it through to Divan. And if anyone wants to join in the web chats, please send an email to Teresa or to myself. I see there is some comments in the chat, Divan, if you just go through, let's just see if we didn't miss one, and then, yeah.
Okay. Just quickly looking at the chat, partners, how is inland use activities funded from OPEX or the closure quantum? Well, for me, you don't want to put it in your closure quantum, because that money usually gets caught up in a guarantee and is only accessible afterwards. But if you have the cash flow to do that, do so. I think it should initially be funded by OPEX, but of course that's the short term. You can't fund your inland use implementation with OPEX if there is no more OPEX. Then it turns into a CAPEX issue. If we look at trying to make it sustainable, and that's why I say start your inland use during operations, because you need it to be cash flow positive. If it's not cash flow positive, you're going to have to put in 50 million rand into a trust account that after taxes, administration fees, that margin that's left must be able to drive that business to continue. So there's various ways of funding it, but optimally you want to fund it when you have money, and that's I think during operations, and that's using your OPEX. You don't want to put it in your quantums. I believe it should be in your quantum. If we look at what the regulations are moving towards inland use planning, the new draft ones, viable inland uses, that means we might need to fund our latent or closure provision with things like I mentioned, the tractor, a couple of cattle, even a trust fund to make sure this business gets cash flow positive. We can't support it forever, and that's why I think the skills development must form part of it, or there must be partnerships with somebody who want to fund that. But talking about venture capitalists and venture capital funding, it's also very difficult because you compete with a lot of other things. People would rather invest in technology, a venture capitalist, than he might want to invest in a high-risk environment that could fail and creates not a big profit margin because you're doing cattle or something smaller to that extent. But I'd love to have a discussion more around that. Any other questions? Yeah, I think the nice thing is we have lots of questions, and that's the idea today. Like I said, and Anya as well in her first presentation, it's impossible to talk about this all at once. And Gwen's idea is great. Let's facilitate more discussion when we've got days and time ahead of us. I changed my mind of a couple of brandies around a campfire, and I changed my mind again in a boardroom. And that would be great to give you both those opinions on inland use planning in Africa and globally as well. Okay. Everybody's got my details. Give me a call, send me an email, and I'll bring in more teams. If you've got more things on the web chat, let's say from this, there's something that you want us to spin off on, send me that as well. See, maybe I can bring in an economist next time, or a financial accountant to look at some of the other aspects of it. Mariette, you've got some interesting questions as well. I'd like to have a chat with you as well in the future. I was actually, on Tuesday, I was at Pan African Resources new tailings reworking project. I was just thinking in land use constantly. I'd like to get your opinion there as well. But with that said, Anya, Teresa, are you happy that I may be relieved of my duties?
Yes, thank you very much, Divan, and thanks everyone for joining in. I think it was a very, very good discussion, and yeah, keep just look out for next web chats that we might host. So thank you very much. Enjoy your day, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.